For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to express my gratitude, Mr. Chairman, to you and the ranking member for these ongoing conversations and this opportunity for us to provide oversight and for the American people to feel comfort, I hope and I believe, with the information that's being delivered. I'd like to thank our witnesses as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't remark on the incredible change that I've seen happen over the last 3 years since I attended the Munich Security Conference in 2019 versus the Munich Security Conference last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. When I was there in 2019, there was a significant question about the West and whether the West would continue to support NATO, and just the fears about how untethered things seemed. But last week or the week before, whenever it was, sorry, time escapes me, but this year's Munich Security Conference, the incredible unity and the strength demonstrated by our allies and our friends, especially with regard to Ukraine and our defense of democracy. And I'm very proud of the role that the United States has played in rebuilding NATO and ensuring that the West has come together in a way to defend our friends and allies and help stop the Russian aggression. And I'd like to, Dr. Call, just in that vein, because there's been just such a lot of conversation, obviously, about the F-16s and about why the United States and some of our friends are not stepping up as quickly as some would like. My colleague, Representative Houlihan, she was about to ask a question, and I'd like to follow that up because I'm curious as well. But when her question, she started as her time ran out, when should the clock start on those F-16s? You laid out for us very clearly and very effectively, the considerations involved and also the financial implications as well. And that's on Congress, right, to make sure that we provide the continued support and to put our money where our mouth is. But when should that clock start ticking for the F-16s? And is that something you can discuss in this setting?
Look, I think it is, a more modernized Ukrainian Air Force will be important in the medium and long term for Ukraine to continue to defend the territory that it claws back and to deter Russia in the future. So I think there is a medium to long term requirement. The challenge, of course, is even if it was a short term requirement, we couldn't get it to them immediately anyway, and we don't assess that it is the highest short term priority. And by the way, neither do the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians' priorities are air defense systems, so they're integrated air and missile defense systems, artillery and fires, armor and mechanized. And because every dollar you spend on one is a dollar you can't spend on another, there are real trade-offs. Obviously, Ukraine is going to continue having conversations with us. As I said, President Zelensky discussed this with President Biden in Kyiv last week. Zelensky has had similar conversations with our UK and French allies. The UK has announced an interest in starting to do some training, so we'll see where that leads. There are other countries in NATO, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, I think, that have talked about potentially F-16s that they may be offloading as they upgrade to F-35s. So I do think this conversation will continue. As I sit in the Pentagon, and I have to say, what does Ukraine need right now to stay in the fight and turn the tide against the Russians in the first half of this year, which I think is going to be decisive for the conflict? It's just hard for me to tell any member of Congress or the American people that the best use of that dollar spent right now is on F-16s.
Thank you so much, Dr. Call. And I only have a few seconds left, but I am wondering, in terms of the replenishment of U.S. stocks, is the department looking to utilize critical technologies such as additive manufacturing to fill some of those gaps?
Sorry. I think the short answer is yes, but I think it's probably better for us to arrange a briefing by our acquisitions and sustainment folks to really go through the multi-layered approach that they're taking to this, because they're the real experts on that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Fallon, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, our aid packages to Ukraine have included light tactical vehicles like Humvees. I've been a staunch supporter of the Humvee upgrade. You know, when we had to retrofit the Humvees because of the risk of IEDs, of course, that made it top heavy, but we have the ABS and the ESC rollover kits that prevent that. You know, we've lost too many men and women to rollovers, and a lot have been injured as well. So at the beginning of this fiscal year, approximately 40,000 Humvees that are either new or like new were in our fleet, hadn't received the anti-rollover technology. And my question for the witnesses is, when we're sending Humvees to the Ukraine, and where are they coming from? And more to the point, are we sending Humvees that have already been fully upgraded with the anti-rollover technology? Or are we sending Humvees that are slated to get this upgrade? Or are they coming from the demilitarized vehicle stockpile?
I might ask General Sims if I don't actually know the answer to that question, but DA may, or we may have to take it to come back to you.
Sure, I will have to come back to you. We'll bring that answer back to you. I'm not quite sure.
Okay, because we have Red River Army Depot that does a lot of this work, and they're starving at the vine, and we've got 40,000, units that need this upgrade, and I'd really like to get that in, because it saves about $12 billion rather than buying brand new ones to retrofit the ones we already have. So we want to always be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So for the witnesses as well, one of the initiatives we've been working on in our office with our colleague, our friend from California, Mr. Panetta, is our Ukraine Human Rights Policy Act, and this legislation would take concrete steps to hold Russia accountable for their atrocities that they're committing in Ukraine. So what evidence of war crimes have you seen in Ukraine, including any committed by the Wagner Group? And as the war rages into its second year, what can be done to hold Russia accountable for their actions? And then what can be done during reconstruction?
I think our colleagues at the State Department would probably be better at cataloging all of the horrors, but we've all seen it. There's been a systematic targeting of civilians in Ukraine, clearly a callous disregard for civilian welfare. But this winter, the targeting of critical infrastructure, literally intending to starve and freeze tens of millions of people for no military purpose other than to try to compel the Ukrainians to give up, but certainly in violation of the laws of armed conflict. We've seen Russian troops engage in terrible atrocities, killing civilians, killing detained forces. And of course, we've also seen the deportation of Ukrainian children back to Russia, which is among the most heinous of war crimes.
Doctor, how many are we talking, you think, roughly?
Thousands, but beyond that, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I would encourage you to get a brief from the State Department. They have cataloged all of that.
General, as far as the Wagner Group goes, do you know any more specifics on that? Could you shed some light?
Sure, I don't. Again, as Dr. Call said, I think the State Department could answer that better. But as you and the rest of the country have seen, we're certainly concerned with what we see reported in the news. And just as, and I don't mean to segue, sir, but there was a comment earlier about about Russian atrocities or Russian acts. I think what separates our military, what separates Western military, certainly from the Russians, is our concentration on treating people, the way they should be treated, with dignity, on the laws of armed conflict that Dr. Call mentioned. And I know that we work hard to talk to the Ukrainians about the same things.
Is Russia a signature, General? Do you know? Is it a signature to the Geneva Convention?
Sir, that's a great question.
Just kind of thought about that. I don't know.
So if they are. And even if they weren't, the Geneva Conventions are treated as customary international law, and so binding even on states that don't sign up to them.
And General, is it your professional opinion that the Wagner Group is something you'd be more concerned about because they're not Russian military regulars?
So I think the Wagner Group is given plenty of reason to be concerned. I mean, the fact that they're recruiting members from prisons certainly gives an indication of what kind of character that they're willing to recruit.
General, they say they're not doing that anymore.
Yes, sir.
Should we believe them?
Sir, I'm not sure I would trust the words that are coming from the Russian side right now.
So you're saying, in effect, that authoritarian regimes should not be taken at their word, regardless of whether it's, say, in Beijing or in Moscow?
So I'd agree that, we have a system in which I would trust, and they don't have that same.
I hope all members of Congress just heard you. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. Before we go to the next questioner, I want to remind everybody that we have a hard stop at 12:30 to go to the classified portion of this hearing. Gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by looking back to May of last year and point out that a bipartisan group of members of Congress, including members of this committee, have sent the administration letters, and that's gone on since April of last year all the way right up to right now, calling for the supply of advanced military capabilities to Ukraine quite consistently. So 10 months ago, a number of us called for anti-ship missiles, HIMARS, Abrams tanks, as well as training on and transfer of F-16s. About 5 months ago, once again, bipartisan group of members of this committee called for a long-term defense commitment to Ukraine to include surface-to-air missiles, MLRS, anti-ship missiles, howitzers, and again, training on and transfer of advanced aircraft such as the F-16. Now, in my opinion, these letters represent differing opinions, policy opinions, about the speed at which the United States should seek to deliver advanced fighting capabilities to the battlefield in Ukraine. Now, I really appreciate the conversation that's been going on, just thinking about things such as F-16 or ATACMS or previously Abrams or HIMARS. I think what we have seen is that there are sometimes policy questions and debates and differing opinions. Then there are logistical challenges, maintenance, and the training and capabilities of the Ukrainian fighters themselves, different than policy opinions of a differing nature. And of course, I respect the opinion brought forward by Dr. Carl about authorizations, appropriations, and how do we get the greatest ROI on the money that you have in hand right now to meet the top priorities of the Ukrainian military. But certainly, given enough money, they would prefer to have their top 5 or top 6 or top 10 needs or capabilities met. And the conversation about authorizations and appropriations is really, I think, a question for Congress. As opposed to questions of policy or logistical concerns and challenges. Now, of course, over the weekend, the President's national security team said now's not the right phase of the war for providing Ukraine advanced aircraft. That sounds like a policy decision. And they have also pointed out that the assessment of military commanders advising the president is that we need to focus on tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles and such. I don't think anyone disagrees with that, sir. And you've articulated really that this is about how much money do we have now, what's the greatest need that they have. But Ukraine has articulated a desire to advance their long-range fighting capabilities in the form of ATACMS and F-16s. So just about over a week ago, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, U.S. European Command, briefed members of Congress, Senate and House reportedly, and said that he believed we should send aircraft, drones, ATACMS to enhance the deep fight capabilities of the Ukrainian military. Setting aside all the concerns about logistics or maintenance, or the readiness of the Ukrainian military. General Sims, would you agree with his assessment that this would help Ukraine to win the war ultimately?
Sir, I have no doubt that the continued provision of advanced conventional weapons would help Ukraine on the battlefield, no doubt. And I certainly have been extraordinarily impressed, as most have, with General Cavoli's work in Europe. On this side of the Atlantic, the conversation continues to be around certainly about policy decisions, but
sure.
In our conversations with the Ukrainians, as recent as yesterday with General Zaluzhny and the chairman, we do hold fast to the view that what they need right now are the things in front of them. That F-16s, as an example, would not help them today, but things like air defense, artillery, fighting vehicles, tanks is what we need to ensure we're providing.
So you don't agree with the EUCOM commander that possession of F-16s and ATACMS and other long-range capabilities would help them to win the war?
No, sir. I think that advanced conventional weapons would help anybody win a war.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Is there a policy objection to giving them longer-range fires at this time?
So I think we've both the F-16s and the ATACMS issues, I think, are slightly different, animals.
But in
this
general,
view.
is there a
Because
policy objection?
No, because the F-16s issue is less about a long-range capability. I think there's a general recognition that it will make sense for them over time to transition to fourth-generation aircraft. It's more about the trade-offs. The ATACMS
Just a few
question.
more seconds, but just with that, I would just point out, why not expand this conversation beyond the near term and the limits of the dollars that you have in your possession now and come to Congress with a plan that includes near term, medium term, and long term, given that whether they win the war now or it drags on for several more years, the Russian threat will still remain. So I just think we got to expand the conversation.
Happy to brief you on that, and
Thank you.
frankly, if you come to the classified session, we can also provide some more details on, because we have done some analysis on kind of the future Ukrainian force and what that might look like.
Thank you. Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina, Ms. Mace, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Smith, for hosting this very important hearing. I want to thank the gentlemen who are here today, as well to take all of our very important questions. We're here to address a critical matter of national security and foreign policy in regards to Ukraine, the need for oversight of assets, weapons, munitions, and other aid, lethal aid being provided to Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has highlighted the critical need for rapid aid and support that we're providing to that region. The conflict has resulted in heavy losses for both sides, but we've seen the Ukrainian forces, they've demonstrated their resilience and ability to conduct offensive operations, I believe, over the last year to everyone's surprise. There's no price for resiliency and their belief in their freedom and their fight for freedom. They've been on the world stage, I think, have encouraged and inspired many folks around the world. However, their capacity to defend their sovereignty and security is dependent on receiving timely and effective assistance. In particular, we've seen a troubling pattern of delays and bureaucratic hurdles, policy decisions that have slowed the delivery of aid to Ukraine. I've witnessed this firsthand. I've witnessed the State Department slow rolling in some cases, particularly at the beginning of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And it's my belief in the meetings I've had, both publicly and privately, and in the SCIF, that Ukraine just doesn't have a lot of time. And we want to make sure that our investment in their fight, that they're going to win. It's more important than ever seeing what Russia's trying to do. They want to now take away Poland's borders and other countries. Ukraine can't lose this fight, in my estimation. The situation in Ukraine demands urgent action, a commitment to ensuring the lethal aid and support be provided expeditiously. Congress and DoD need to take the steps to remove any hurdles or address them to ensure the necessary resources are available to fight for Ukraine to fight for its sovereignty and security. Failure to do so would not only endanger Ukraine, but also undermine global stability, global security. And it's my estimation Ukraine is just, I believe, under the gun and just does not have very much time left in this endeavor. My first question is for Undersecretary Call. I'm concerned about the time it took for the U.S. to fully leverage some of our existing processes, like convening the Senior Integration Group for Ukraine, SIG Ukraine, to disperse military aid to Ukraine. And thinking ahead, China and Taiwan, we all know that China is watching. Are there any specific improvements you would make to the department's decision-making process to ensure the U.S. is proactively readying this important partner rather than simply reacting with support? Some of the lessons learned. How long did it take to stand up SIG Ukraine? Some of what you learned over the last year in this process.
Thank you for that, and I'll just say we share your sense of urgency. And there's always going to be red tape, but we have blasted through a lot of it. And if you had, I think, told us a year ago that we could have executed on $31.7 billion in security assistance to anybody, I would have said that was bureaucratically impossible. And it's precisely because we tried to blast through as much red tape as possible. Most of that assistance has come through PDA, Presidential Drawdown Authority, and typically because we pre-position things and get our ducks in a row, a lot of that equipment starts flowing in within days of the president signing the PDA, and Lieutenant General Sims can talk to you more about that. In terms of our internal processes, we have two. We have something called the Cross-Department Working Group, which is essentially the group that my office runs, but it's got stakeholders from all the services, the Joint Staff, the combatant commands, et cetera, to rack and stack Ukrainian priorities and figure out the priorities for various PDA and USAI packages. So that's really about kind of teeing up for the Secretary, ultimately, these recommendations that then go over to the White House. We then have the SIG process, which you
How long did it take to stand up the SIG?
I'd have to get back to you on the exact date. I think the SIG was stood up within a couple of months of the.
Is that
of the
fast
war.
enough, in your opinion?
Well, I think that we've stood up a lot of processes that are new.
Do you think that Taiwan has a couple of months? If
We've
it
already have a SIG for
Yeah.
Taiwan. So to your point,
stood up and ready to go? So it's all
it meets
It's
it
there.
meets monthly, chaired by the Deputy Secretary of Defense.
excellent. And then on the working group, the cross-department working group, is that working better now than it has been before because of the urgency of Ukraine? Have you all learned over the last year how to improve some of the red tape, I guess? What red tape was removed to make it work better, faster, more in this case?
Well, just traditionally, we've not presidential drawdown authority has been used to provide things in the amounts of, hundreds of billions of dollars at the upper end,
Yeah.
not tens of billions of dollars. So there was a lot of learning curve. Essentially, what we figured out was to make sure all the stakeholders were involved. You had an iterated process that culminates in a 4-star meeting that I chair about every 10 days. And then that pushes recommendations up to the chairman and the secretary, who then push those recommendations over to the White
Gentleman's
House.
time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from